Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the NERI April general meeting. And we have a few announcements before we move on to our guest speaker who is here. But thank you for joining us. I know it's the weekend before Easter, and a lot of people are going home. So we really appreciate you being here today. I'd like to introduce our general meeting speaker, Dr. Brett Robertson, who is the Assistant Professor in the College of Information and Communications and the Associate Director of the Hazards, Vulnerability, and Resilience Institute at the University of South Carolina. His research focuses on risk communication, disaster resilience, emergency communication, and we're very excited for him to come and chat with us. Dr. Brett, I'm going to pass on the screen to you now.
Hey, thank you so much for that introduction. And I'm very excited to be here today to talk about some of my research and hopefully allow time to be candid with you about my experiences as an early career scholar in this space. I prepared a presentation today that's really kind of a broad, big picture overview talk of some of my ideas. It's less of a formal research presentation that kind of gets into disciplinary specifics. So I've kept it broad, just knowing the audience here. But that being said, if there are specific questions or we want to kind of dive deeper into a topic that I'm discussing, like please feel free to raise your hand on Zoom or just kind of chime in as need be. And if we determine we just kind of want to have more of an informal conversation and less rely on the slide deck, then that's okay with me too. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And everyone here should be able to see the slides, right? Okay,
Yes, correct.
so give me a second to make sure I've got my other um, thing up. So everyone here can see the slide deck, correct? Okay, put this up. So um, thank you for, again, the introduction. My name is Brett Robertson. I'm an assistant professor in the College of Information and Communications at the University of South Carolina. And as of this past January 2025, I'm now the Associate Director of the Hazards, Vulnerability, and Resilience Institute, also known as HVRI, at the University of South Carolina. It's an amazing interdisciplinary institution at our campus that is doing really important work around hazards and risk. And my research focuses primarily on disaster preparedness and risk communication, but kind of more specifically how we make sure critical information reaches the people who need it in the moments that they need it the most. And I've got the opportunity to work on a lot of different projects, both as a graduate student at the University of Texas at Austin, as well as my time as a faculty member at University of South Carolina. I've studied extreme heat events, hurricanes, infrastructure failures, misinformation during public emergencies, the experience of underserved, vulnerable populations in hazards and risks, looking at the older adult community and organizing processes around disasters. And across all that work, a theme really just like keeps coming up over and over again. We can have the best forecasts, we can have the best models, we can have the best systems in place, but if people don't understand the message or even trust the messenger altogether, the system breaks down. And as we well know, trust in science is at an all-time low in the United States. And so we have to figure out some solutions to deal with these different barriers that we're facing as hazard and disaster researchers. And so this is what brings me to this idea of kind of going from warning to wellness. And we're getting a lot better at issuing warnings. Technology has made that a lot easier. But what we haven't fully mastered is moving people from that moment of warning to meaningful action to long-term wellness and resilience. And so today I'm going to share a framework with you, a conceptual broad framework that is what I'm thinking about right now in terms of how I'm situating my work. And it's not a perfect framework by any means, but hopefully it'll help challenge us to deliver better information, to design better information humanize it, and then make it stick. So we often think about warnings as, you know, really kind of being a default. It's what we want to do when we want to move fast, when a risk is approaching, when systems are under pressure. But a warning isn't just a strategy, it's also a spark. And without the right materials around it, it completely fades. And what I found, and what many of you probably experience in your own research, is that issuing a warning is really the easiest part. It's the challenge thereafter that can become problematic. And so warnings, as the literature states, often don't lead to action or even proper action altogether. So how can we create communication ecosystems that move beyond just putting a message out there, disseminating a message and expecting everyone to follow the pro-social behavior or the recommended action? We ultimately want to move towards getting people to be prepared and ultimately towards wellness. And I'm going to frame a lot of the conversation around extreme heat, which is where I'm doing a lot of my work at the moment. Now, heat is very much different than the drama of a hurricane. It doesn't necessarily have the visuals of a wildfire. Heat can be silent. It creeps in. And because of that, it's often the leading cause of weather-related deaths in the United States, if we look at it that way. And it's ultimately really difficult for people to respond to extreme heat events because there's no clear start or end event like a tornado. There's not even just a single impact zone. And so this effect builds over time. And it's especially difficult for people who don't have access to air conditioning, reliable transportation, or steady shelter. And unfortunately, in many cases, by the time someone realizes they're in danger, it's often too late. And so I found, unfortunately, heat is a really good lens to examine how warnings work and when they don't. Because with heat, the gap between receiving information and taking action is super visible. It really also gives us so many different facets. As a social scientist, I look at heat because I'm able to learn more about system strain, the effectiveness in disinformation, how taking delayed action can result in consequences. All of these things collide. And so I've kind of started thinking and theorizing a little bit about the idea that heat, um, through extreme heat, we can discuss the organizing processes through a simple framework. And I found that thinking about getting people prepared, because that's everything that happens before a hazard event. We often think of preparedness as being the outreach, the education, the community engagement, the planning. And then we move into warning, and that's that, really quick moment of contact. That's the alert, the advisory, that's the message that signals danger. But wellness is the outcome that we're aiming for. It's not just survival, it's stability, it's health, it's resilience, it's the ability to recover. And I argue that in this framework, communication strategies can moderate the relationship between each of these variables. So from preparedness to warning, communication determines whether people are going to take or recognize that they are at risk. From preparedness to warning, risk perception plays such a huge role. And then from warning to wellness, communication allows us to determine whether or not people are going to take action, whether they recognize efficacy, whether they know they need to act, or they find that the recommended strategy has some perceived value of utility to it. So it's not just a side task. I think a lot of people think of communications and disasters as people just releasing press releases, but communication is really systematic. It's part of the system. Some people in my discipline argue communication is just as important as the roads, the shelters, the clinics that we have in place. And so when we think about effective communication, as infrastructure, I kind of actually mean that. I think communication is the backbone that connects people to information, to resources, and ultimately better pro-social outcomes. So we all are very much aware, unfortunately, about changing weather patterns. Some may argue that in certain places right now, it's even hard to discuss climate change. But heat is more than just a weather event. I'd argue heat, in the lens that I'm talking about, is a signal. It's a pressure test for all of the systems that we rely on every day. And so we think about our aging infrastructure, our roads, our electrical grids, our cooling systems, our water pipes. When those systems were designed, installed, created, built, they weren't designed for the temperatures, the high temperatures that we're seeing today. And when a heat wave hits an area, these actual aging infrastructure components are pushed way beyond their limits. And the ability to respond, of course, we know that's not equal across the board. There are places that have modern cooling centers that have tree covers. People may have access to transit, but others don't. And so the reality is weather doesn't affect everyone in the same way. And the heat itself could be widespread, but as my colleague Kirsten Dow does a lot of work in urban heat islands, how heat is actually felt and how people are able to act on it really depends on where they live, what resources they have, and how connected they are to local services. So I would argue that planning for heat isn't just about forecasting, it's about recognizing these pressure points that overall affect the infrastructure system. Now, once heat puts pressure on the system, everything starts moving really fast. Everything starts moving at a rapid pace, and one failure in the chain can cascade super quickly. So I've looked at data from local emergency departments in the area where I live and seeing how they code for heat-related illness. And you'd see that and not be surprised that um, coding for heat is not necessarily something that's really easy to do because someone may come in with a symptom that looks like one thing, but actually could have been instigated through just being outside for long periods of time. And this also affects public transit because bus routes can be delayed, overheated buses, high rail temperatures. And then we have call centers, they're flooded with questions, confusion, all sorts of urgent needs. And these are not isolated issues by any means. This is just one part of the network of services that help keep people safe during hazards. And so even when one part is stretched, it pulls on the other. So the communication question that a lot of my colleagues are trying to answer is how well do these systems talk to each other? And it's one thing to have individual response teams do their job well, but if a hospital doesn't know a transit line is down or a city hotline isn't aware of a cooling center closure, we lose time. And I think that's where communication becomes more than messaging, it becomes an operational function. Communication allows us to support real-time coordination and helps systems share load and reduce duplication. Now, from the pragmatic standpoint here too, it also gives frontline workers like 911 dispatchers, those who work in clinics, for example, the clarity that they need to make really fast, informed decisions under pressure. But this is where I think rubber meets the road in one way too, because even when we send warnings, they don't always land in the same way that it does for person to person. Um, First, we have seen such a huge rise in message fatigue, and people, I'm sure all of us can relate to this, that every day on our mobile devices, we receive so many alerts, not just about weather, not just about heat, but about traffic, safety, school closings. And now it becomes harder for people to prioritize what is important because all the messages start sounding the same, and then people stop noticing them. And then the second problem really is with communicating warnings is that they're unclear most of the time. Messages that say heat advisory in effect without actually explaining what that means or what action someone should take, that's really confusing. So if I see something and I don't know what it means to me or I don't understand it, I'm just going to scroll along. The immediacy of the message or relevancy of the message is gone completely. So, for example, if you on your phone right now got a message that said, heat alert in your area, stay safe. I mean, what does that actually mean to you? I don't know. I don't know what that means. What area are we talking about? How do we stay safe? And if you think about it from the perspective of a migrant farm worker who is working in a peach field in rural South Carolina outside at 2 p.m., what does that message mean? Heat alert in your area, stay safe for someone whose job is to work outside. So, in short, kind of when the message isn't really clear or trusted or even actionable, people continue to stay at risk. And it's that moments of disconnect, however small, that can add up to really serious and grave outcomes. Another major problem in communicating around weather and heat is that oftentimes the numbers don't necessarily match the risk. And even if we assume people are going to read the alert, we may run into another problem, which is the numbers itself may actually be misleading. So a lot of just kind of public facing forecasting defaults to air temperature. Most of us on this call probably know air temperature is just one variable. It doesn't tell the full story of how heat is felt. Now, then we have the heat index, which combines temperature and humidity, but heat index really only reflects shaded conditions. So if you're walking across a hot asphalt parking lot, you're standing on a roof, you're working in direct sun, the heat index can actually seriously underestimate real exposure. And then there's a metric that does a better job, the wet bulb globe temperature, and that accounts for air temperature, humidity, solar radiation, wind speed. And the wet bulb globe temperature has been used for decades in fields like occupational safety, in military training. A lot of youth sports use it, competitive sports use it. It's aligned a lot with psychological risk. And the issue is, even though wet bulb globe temperature can be really, really helpful, it's rarely used in public communication. And in the surveys that I've conducted with public health professionals and emergency managers, most report using air temperature or heat index, even when they acknowledge just those numbers were not enough. And when wet bulb globe temperature is actually used, it's often just kind of plopped in without even explaining what it is. So if an average person just sees the acronym WBGT, they might not even know what that is. And so I think that presents a really problematic disconnect, because even if wet bulb globe temperature is more accurate, it becomes unusable if people can't understand it. And when people can't understand it, they start tuning out the science. And when the data lacks meaning, people's decision making becomes even more problematic. And so, one of the things that I'm trying to do in my own work is kind of understand how we take metrics and make them translatable to audiences that really need that information. All right. Okay. So, one of the best strategies, first and foremost, is to use plain language. And if I were to tell somebody today the wet bulb globe temperature is 89, that number means very little to them if they're not trained in how to interpret it. But if I say something like, I don't know, it's dangerous to work outside between 12 noon and 4 p.m. You should take 10-minute breaks every 30 minutes. You should drink water every 15 minutes. That's no longer a number. That's a decision guide. And clear messages like this are what make the difference. It gives people a couple different things: a time window, a behavior to follow, and a context for why it matters. And we've seen a lot in the wireless emergency alert literature that people who receive these messages in short, repeatable formats are more likely to understand the message better and follow the advice that the message gives. But you have to consider context too. So the messages may need to change depending on the setting, which a lot of the times these warnings are so standardized. So, for example, the supervisor of a seed farm needs very different guidance from who a school principal is going to follow. Those who are running a mobile health clinic outside may need some advice and warning that's very different than a transit manager. So I think the key here is keeping the messages clear, specific, and tied to like real world decisions. Because when we do that, we take risk and translate it into action. And then we move on from awareness to actually making a strong impact. But unfortunately, our literature often um, struggles quite a bit with focusing on those who are at highest risk because they're the ones who are less likely to receive, understand, and act on the message. So, take, for example, unhoused populations. I've done a lot of field work in unhoused communities in Columbia, South Carolina. We have a very high unhoused population. Most of these individuals do not have access to regular Wi-Fi or power. They may have a mobile device. It may be a smart device, but it's often not connected to cellular data or maybe a low data plan if they can afford it, which means they may not be able to receive text alerts, push notifications, or know when a heat advisory is in effect. One of the strategies that we've seen with unhoused populations is that their informal networks are actually used very clearly to communicate messages around excessive heat. So I think that's a finding that a lot of literature on unhoused and homeless populations are noticing is that the social networks within unhoused communities are where a lot of health information is being shared. Now, also, we have to consider people who have limited reading ability or language familiarity because when alerts are packed with jargon or even like small print, for example. So, I've done work in older adult retirement communities and in piloting a survey, a quantitative survey to understand risk perception. I had to follow some advice that was like print your survey in size 14 font, double space, single sided because low literacy levels are very high among older adults. So making sure that things aren't easy to miss or misunderstood, because past experience kind of tells us someone to not trust official messages because of confusion or not being able to understand or lack of follow-up or mixed signals. And then it just becomes harder to encourage action in that moment. So I think this is why communication is so important in considering the discipline of communication in hazard and risk research is crucial because it helps us understand the populations that are vulnerable, that are underserved, and as communicators, we can help meet people where they are at. Now, I also want to kind of talk about this idea that a lot of people understand very clearly from our health promotion and health behavior literature that if we want to understand how people are going to take action, we have to understand their intention or their intention to take action. And so we've seen several theoretical frameworks. Many of you probably already know these from the health belief model, theory of planned behavior, theory of reason action. But if we understand intention here, I think we're more likely to get people to a place where they understand risk perception and they're more likely to engage in outcomes that are going to lead them to healthier, safer, or life-saving decisions. So I won't touch on this slide in great detail, but I still think drawing back on theory is really important in in this space. Again, one of the major arguments of why I think communication is so important, and I'm trying to hit this nail over the head a little bit here, is that I think as we move into kind of just main takeaways and recommendations, communication is infrastructure. It's not just something we tack on or we have a specialist do. it's not just an afterthought. And I think communication is really vital to public health, like roads, clinics, shelters, and power are, because communication is the thing that links all of those things together. It connects emergency services to hospitals. It links public alerts to community resources. And it's a channel that helps people make informed decisions when they need it the most. But it has to be maintained like physical infrastructure. Communication just doesn't run on autopilot. It has to be built with intention. It needs to be tested over time through drills, through feedback, through refinement. And there has to be, of course, funding, staffing, and continual improvement. Um, when I mention that to practitioners or those in industry, I say that, but of course, we all know that's easier said than done. And so we need to treat communication as a foundational component because we can increase the speed, the coordination, and effectiveness of every part of our public health system. And so as we think about, kind of putting um, research into practice a little bit, um, I just want to make sure that we recognize a couple things that first and foremost, like warnings alone aren't enough. And we need to consider how we're communicating these warnings, what's really important to the populations that are more at risk, especially in the work of excessive heat. I think that's really key and critical here. And I also think that communication shapes behavior and it shapes wellness too. So the right communication, the right messaging, the proper thinking around it can really lead to pro-social outcomes. And then finally, I think as hazard researchers, we really do need to bridge the gap between data and action. And I think we've got tons of really great data, and we need to get people to buy into some of our ideas. And emergency management organizations are often using very antiquated systems where I think communication can play a huge role in getting people to work well with each other, to showcase tools that are easy to use. So that way we can take our data as myself as a social scientist and say, hey, by drawing from, this theoretical model that we've created in our study, we show you that intention to avoid the heat is a key, the key predictors of that are X, Y, and Z. So we have to make sure, just because we throw something in a regression model and see what sticks, we have to also consider how that may work with our community partners, our government agencies, as well as entities that really could use our feedback as academics to make informed decisions, especially when a lot of decisions are made using old antiquated methods. So I'll kind of pause the conversation there. And hopefully this was kind of a broad rundown of how communication can play a role in the hazard process, especially through the lens I'm currently working on, excessive extreme heat. But I'm happy to keep the conversation going and I'm happy to address questions that folks may have. So yeah, thank you very much for having me today.
If folks have questions, feel free to unmute, put them in chat. We can read them out loud. Yeah.
Hi, thanks. This was great. I have a question, and this is like a big box, but I'm just interested in where you see the dividing line between like acute discrete risk communication information for singular event versus the sort of general like cross-hazard um, overarching, particularly with at-risk populations.
Such a good question, Kate, because um, this is something I'm grappling with right now, and I'm actually thinking a lot about people's recall of climate events, and I'm trying to find the sweet spot at the moment for a particular project where I want people to think about their experience with certain types of hazards. But our team is really debating this because people's recall of climate events, there are so many different factors. So when people experience a singular, big, traumatic hazard event, obviously that stays as what, we kind of call informally a core memory. Um, but a lot of the literature in the social sciences and psychology in particular says people's recall of climate events is limited to about a 10-year period, unless they've experienced something very extreme and specific, like Hurricane Katrina, for example. My colleague, Dr. Susan Cutter, has done a ton of work on Hurricane Katrina, and people are able to tell stories about it. But when we ask people to talk about their experience of extreme heat, we have to narrow down the timing of it just a little bit, because heat is harder for people to have a singular, event to it, unless they're working in a very specific industry. So in the agricultural industry, for example, recall of extreme heat might be more applicable, because people will remember, okay, last summer it was so hot that, all of my crops died and I couldn't make any money that summer. So I remember that hot summer of, this or that. So people do remember certain acute things, but I would say that the memory recall is about 10 years. Thanks for that question. I hope I addressed that okay.
If no one else has a question, I would love to ask one. So I do have access to your bio, and I saw that you recently won an undergraduate teaching award, for which, like, congratulations. And I was
Thank
wondering
you.
if you could talk a little bit about teaching pedagogy, especially as it comes to talking about sensitive topics like natural hazard and disaster research.
Yeah, thank you very much for that kudo. That's very kind of you to say. Yeah, I've been at the University of South Carolina now for 5 years, and I started teaching standalone classes as a master's student. I'm a product of the California State University system, so when you get a master's degree at a Cal State school, they often force you to teach standalone classes as instructor of record, first semester masters. So pedagogy for me was kind of trial by fire a little bit. And I've been really fortunate to have good mentors and have taken proper pedagogy courses in graduate school that allowed me just to learn some of the skills of teaching. And I think when it comes to hazards and risk and disasters, I think there is a lot. I think this generation of undergraduates is really into this topic, which excites me a lot, because I think people are starting to recognize, especially, this current generation, that like the weather is crazy. I just sometimes say that to my undergrads, and like what we're experiencing right now is unprecedented. And the youth, I'm saying the youths kind of broadly, but I think they're buying into this notion. And so I think students are willing to engage in the topic because they're able to draw from personal experience. They're able to draw from what's happening right now. I mean, we live in Columbia, South Carolina. Summers are extremely hot. There's high humidity and high temperature. So, we get like the perfect storm of a summer. And we also experience the effects of tropical storms and hurricanes. And so students are seeing the increase of hazards and disasters, and wanting to engage with it. So I think it becomes an important part of the classroom. I'm really lucky I get to teach a class every other year called environmental communication. And in the discipline of communication, there is a subdiscipline called environmental communication. And some people focus the lens through environmental justice. Others focus on more of a hazard approach. Others focus on a policy or political approach too. There's many ways to think about environmental communication. So I think a class like that allows for that sensitivity to come to light, but also be explored and discussed too.
Thank you. I think we also have maybe two questions in chat now.
Yeah. So there's a question in the chat from one of my research on 17 Latin American countries. I've seen that past experience of a disaster affect future perception of a disaster. And how do you think less perceived future risk affects risk communication? And how can we measure it? I think that is a really good question, and one that every more esteemed hazard scholar is tried to grapple with in their career. I don't necessarily know if I have an answer to it, because I know obviously past experience, the relationship between past experience and taking action in a disaster is is like gotten tons of different kinds of findings out there. I've looked at it through a preparedness lens. So I asked people in a survey, to name off the number of hazards they experienced, and asked them if they were willing, if they had an emergency supply kit in their home. And what I found was that even though people had experienced a lot of hazards and disasters in the past, the ability for them or not the ability, but the actual finding was that most people didn't have an emergency supply kit, even though they had experienced the impacts of some disaster or hazard. So I think we can use communication to better understand how to get people to move the needle from yes, I've experienced this, but no, I need to be ready for the next one, to also, I need to take some action. There's another question in the chat. It says, I might have missed this, but could you talk a little bit more about the informal communication methods you use that you mentioned that the unhoused population is using? Yeah, so in one of the studies that I published with our team last year, we did a lot of field work in our unhoused community in Columbia, South Carolina. And this required us to get in the field and bring paper surveys with us with incentivized gift cards. People were willing to fill out a survey and talk to us, and we were willing to collect data from them with the incentive component. And we asked many different questions, many about where people get their weather information from. And I'm in the process of analyzing some of that specific data about where they get their information from. But one of the things that's really interesting, besides word of mouth, is people really rely on community resources and share those community resources within their networks. So, for example, we stood on the sidewalk of where our big public library is in downtown Columbia, and we weren't allowed on the property of the library, but we could be on a public sidewalk. And we found that people were going into the library not just to stay cool each day, but to access the internet, to look up weather information online. Many people did have a smartphone. So even if it's an older smartphone or a smartphone that doesn't have a data plan or cellular plan attached to it, they were able to use their smartphone connected to Wi-Fi. So those are just some of the informal communication methods that unhoused populations are using around weather events. And I think it's going to continue to expand, and I'm excited to dive into that more.
I think we have a couple more questions in chat. One of them is, how does proactive and effective communication influence disaster preparedness and response compared to reactive approaches? Can improved communication strategies help us avoid or mitigate future disasters more effectively?
I think that's a great question. And the second part of the question is absolutely yes. I think using evidence-based communication strategies can help us not necessarily like stop disasters from happening. Obviously, we can make, individual changes, but if we know disasters are coming, we need to be better prepared, both at the kind of individual level, but also at the meso community level or organizational level too, and use communication strategies to get people to want to, like not have to deal with the severe impacts of disasters. And that's why, the literature that I look at argues, like just building an emergency supply kit is so key to like having a layer of protection against the impact of disasters. And I find that if we can communicate the importance of a supply kit, if we can show that others around me are either have one or are making one, if we can show that it's easy to build one, more people are going to actually take time to cull together emergency supplies. It's not a complicated thing to just grab, several different items together and put them in a bag. That's easy for a lot of people to do, but it's the apathy around it that's problematic. And so communication can really help us, proactive communication can really help us influence the relationship between doing certain things beforehand that can be life-saving.
Absolutely, yeah. Another question is, have you worked any coastal hazard topics, for example?
I've worked in coastal have you ever worked for coastal hazards? In terms of studying coastal hazards, is that what the question is about?
Yeah. So that's my question. So yes, I'm a little bit interested in that area because I'm doing research in coastal field. So I'm a little bit. For some people, you may have knowing about the reef currents, and they may be some people get trapped into that. So and sometime also a little bit of landslide happens in that area.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, coastal hazards, I think, are especially in the state where I live, where the coastline is having a huge surge in population increase. So the Wall Street Journal reported that like people are moving to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, at such an exponentially high rate. And I think we're finding that a lot of people are retiring and moving to coastal cities. And so this is, again, where communication becomes really important, because people who are moving to coastal regions probably haven't experienced the impact of what those types of hazards on the coast are like. A high increase of people who move to Hilton Head Island, South Carolina. We have a satellite campus in Beaufort and Bluffton, South Carolina. The residents who are moving to those areas are from places like Ohio and Kentucky and New York, New Hampshire. That's just one example. And the disasters people experience having lived in those regions their whole life and now moving to a southeastern coastal location are very different. And so I think a project that I would like to do, and I wrote a proposal for it, didn't get funded, was to spend time with communities that have had population surges of residents from regions that experience very different kinds of hazards. I think that work is really important and crucial, and I think it's definitely worth pursuing.
I think we have time for one more question, which we also have in chat. What do you think is the role of social media? Roughly, what's the tapped and untapped potential role it can play in this area?
Oh, I think social media is so crucial. I think there is so much both tapped and untapped potential to it. And we could offer entire courses on social media and hazard communication. Like that could be an entire 16-week semester's worth of content. So I think there's so much to be said about the role of social media. Obviously, in the work that I have done, I've found that social media is crucial in real-time disaster communication. And I'm happy to share, if you're looking for a little bit of specific articles of things that I've written around social media use in times of crisis and disaster, really, really key. And so, yeah, I could talk about this all day. I could talk about it for an entire semester. So if for the person who asked this question, if you'd like to chat a little bit more specifically, just send me a message, okay?
Avipriya, if you can quickly ask one more question.
Yeah, just a quick question. So thank you for the presentation. So I have a quick question regarding, so if we have a heat map over there, so how you consider the human factors for, like, there are some places in the world, they consider these things are very hot and humid, and in the the very cold regions, this may be the cold regions, they consider this is very hot, and in the very hot zones, some people consider that this is not absolutely normal. So how you consider the human factors and how the heat map actually, is there any opportunity that the research can be expanded to the human factors over there? What do you think about it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think even just from, if I were to go on my iPhone right now and look at the temperature of Columbia, South Carolina, where I live, even within the same city or same zip code, the actual temperature could be drastically different, like very much drastically different. And in a rural community that I'm spending a lot of time in South Carolina, we've actually installed heat sensors because we recognize the fact that within this rural county where there is not a National Weather Service office that services it, it's not part of a census designated metropolitan region, people's perception of temperature and heat is so different. And so I do think we have to continue to think about that. Just because it says it's something in one place doesn't mean that's actually what somebody's experiencing.
Dr. Brett, if it's okay, could you share your email as well in chat if anybody would like to reach out to you? But we would like to thank you. Oh, someone already did. We'd like to thank you for coming and chatting with us. I'm going to share my screen as well. Our next meeting is in June, on June 20th, because in May we again have the mini conference, and we'd hope you'd come and join us for the mini conference instead of having a general meeting. And we have a few minutes to transition, but I'd like to thank Dr. Brett again for coming and talking with us.
Thank you all so much. And again, feel free to email me if you have any specific questions or concerns, or just want to chat about hazard, risk, or disaster communication. I'm more than happy to chat. So please stay in touch, everybody, and take care.
So we have Korea and or Chris to take over. And do you guys need any help with transitions?
Yes, and we are going to stay here. We don't have any breakout room, I think, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I can start it. Thank you so much for staying with us during the meeting. And now we are going to start the RSR meeting, which is about 30 minutes. And today for the RSR meeting, we have two presentations from the data challenge team. We are going to start with group 1, and the title of the presentation is Utilizing Machine Learning to Assess the Performance of Single-Family Residential Building During Windstorm Events. The presentations are about 7 to 10 minutes, and after that we have we open the floors for the discussions and question answer. And for the second presentation, we have the recorded video, but we appreciate any feedbacks because we can let the presenters know about the feedbacks or any other questions. By this, I would invite the first group to share their screen and start their presentation.
Yeah, if Peter or Mujungo is here, we can start it, or we can wait.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah, we are here. Okay.
So Peter is not here.
Sure.
He's in class, I believe.
All right.
So I think you can share your screen and you can start.
Yeah, just 1 second. I'm just
So something I add here, instead of having RSR subcommittee meetings, we decided, since we are approaching the mini conference, the data challenge teams volunteer to present their work, and we replaced that with the data challenge, and we should thank Parisa for arranging data challenge now. And Mujingo, you can start.
all right. Thank you so. All right, thank you so much. So my name is Mujungu. I'm a PhD student at the University of Memphis. Over the last few weeks, I've been working with Peter from Missouri University of Technology. He's also a PhD student in civil engineering. And for this particular data challenge, we decided to work on the windstorm data set. So kind of the idea behind the project that we're trying to develop was to sort of, based on the wind damage data set that we had, try and learn different relationships that machine algorithms could learn. So today, more specifically, I'll be talking about some of the first parts of the project that we have been able to accomplish to date. And so our title of the project is Utilizing Machine Learning to Assess the Performance of Single-Family Residential Buildings During Windstorm Events. So we had this wind data set that had almost close to 5,000 data points of just different sort of aspects of either the wind damage or the property attributes. Some were numerical and then some were categorical. But sort of the first thing that we sort of did in this particular project was to sort of try and understand a little bit more about our data. So we tried some different approaches. We spent about our first 2-3 meetings kind of just going through the data set, understanding sort of the correlations or associations that sort of exist between our our target variables versus our feature sets. And in most cases, we didn't get like super strong correlations. A lot of them were just weak correlations that sort of existed within the data set. But we also just try to do a little bit more data pre-processing, which is usually the first step, right? So that involved also, transforming some of these features so that we can make them easier for machine learning models to sort of understand them as well, or use them in this particular models. And then one of the other things that we did, which is something that's very common in flood hazard data set, is an outlier detection. Simply because that with a lot of reconnaissance data, based after some events, you do tend to have outliers, or you do tend to have some erroneous data. So we wanted to sort of see, based on our data set, what we could remove so that we can make it easier for some of these algorithms to learn. So in this case, we use isolation forests. It's a good outlier detection. And of course, there are many other methods that exist, but this is a really nice one, well documented in literature. So we decided to pursue this one. So once we were able to do some of these outlier detection, we removed a few data points, and sorry. So we were able to remove some data points. Luckily, it was just a few data points, so it didn't really remove too much data points. So that was also a good thing. But also some of these like outlier points or whatever, they were at least removed, and now this was getting us ready to sort of start the next parts of our project. So one of the things that we tried in this project, and you would see, is that we tried to use a variety of different algorithms to kind of see which ones would perform best, because before we can actually learn the relationships that are developed in these data sets, we also need to fit some sort of empirical equation or empirical formulations to these data sets. Ensemble models have been well documented over the last 20 plus years, with bagging being one of them. And basically it's just because they learn through sort of some sort of census voting, or sort of by taking some of these weak learners and combining them to sort of build some strong learners based on learning some of the weaknesses and the strength of some of these the different learners that are existing in the model. So we tried bagging and boosting ensemble models. Example of boosting algorithms are, for instance, XGBoost, which is a popular one, or cat boost as well, which is also becoming fairly popular over time. And then finally, we split the data set for training and testing purposes. And then this particular page kind of just shows you the summary. So we tried different approaches, as I just initially mentioned, and we try to create some sort of diversity in learning as well, whereby we used some neural networks, as well as some GLMs or some linear regression, because they learn differently, right? So for instance, like neural networks do learn differently compared to linear regressions, or compared to, let's say, tree-based methods, such as the boosting algorithms that we just talked about. So over the last 3 meetings that we had, we've been having weekly meetings, and we've been just trying to sort of try and find, the best, the different performance of these models. And this table particularly summarizes that some of the results that we found. So we found, of course, that Cat Boost performed relatively well, although we also found that the performance of these models they're not too far off from each other. But from an analysis point of view, one of the things that we were trying to do here for the next step, and we've been a little bit slow on that, but we wanted to see what a tree-based method versus what, let's say, a deep learning method and a linear regression method would learn from this particular data set, using some of these explainable AI methods. So this is just a this is a bar graph just presenting some of those results again. And this is, so, one of the most interesting things as well, is that we were trying to see sort of the scatter plot, and this is something that we were still working on, to kind of see if there was some sort of disparity in predicting, let's say, low values versus high values and whatnot, and sort of try and see some, do a little bit more analysis in some of how the model is doing the prediction as well. This is something we haven't completed. We just started working on it. We're trying to, use sharp feature importance, and specifically symbolic regression. So this is something that we're going to be working on next, to sort of try and use the developed models to sort of understand more what is going on in the data set, or what the relationship with the baseline being the study that was also published in this area that presented this data set. So yeah, so some of the first steps that we were able to sort of do right now was to create some of these models, let them do the prediction of the wind damage to residential property. And then sort of the next steps involve now taking a deep dive into explainable AI methods such as SHARP, to kind of see how these values interact with our target variable. So basically, yeah, so that's what we've been able to sort of accomplish in the last 2-3 weeks. And yeah, hopefully now, since the semester is coming to an end, and in the next week or so, we should be able to finish the last parts of the project. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, you go, Priya.
No, you go ahead.
No, I think you can start the question and answer. I myself have two questions.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
Everybody, if you have any question, please ask. So I see Jordan was really interested. You ask your question, maybe Jordan comes up and asks some questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for presentation. It was really great. I have one question. When you were talking about the correlation and you mentioned that we see the strong correlation and weak correlation, I want to understand that how you define that strength. Because for instance, if it depends on a field, for instance, in the social science, even having the correlation of 0.5 can be a great correlation. If you provide some interpretability on that side, it would be really great. The other part, you were showing different models, machine learning models that you were using. I am curious, you only decide to choose the best model based on your test performance? If yes, I recommend, for instance, to use other criteria like AIC or BIC, which are designed for the model selection. It can help you a lot on that. But all in all, it was a great presentation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. So for the model selection criteria, I think at the end, thank you for the suggestion, first of all. That actually makes a whole lot of sense. But initially, when we started to brainstorm about the project, we were thinking that maybe we'll go with the best performing model. So that was like 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
But on our last meeting on Saturday, last week Saturday, we decided that after we sort of reviewed sort of the different performance of the different models, that we were going to take one tree-based model.
Okay.
Meaning that models that learn using decision tree weak learners like XGBoost, CatBoost, or Random Forest. And then we're going to do one for deep learning models because, again, they learn differently.
Yeah.
And then we're going to do one for linear regression. So rather than taking the best performing model, we thought we would try and sort of diversify based on how the different models learn, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, it completely makes sense. So you put your concentration on the learning process. That is also a good thing. Because you are using, for instance, DNN here, they usually have memory problem. It is good to, for instance, compare on a memory side too, but it is really great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions?
I have a question.
All right. Go ahead.
So I don't know if I missed this, but it looks like a lot of the parameters that you've shown and like even in your kind of correlation matrix are types of damage indicators. You have some on the actual components present, like large door, things like that. I'm curious as to what your actual influence parameters are to predict roof cover damage. Because I would not expect things like the large door opening being present or not to really have that much effect on your actual response variable if these parameters are the ones you're using in your models.
So we were trying to do it for so in this particular, initially when we started with roof damage. But then at the end we were trying to sort of put everything in the model first and then kind of filtering out the results from that, deciding which sort of predictor variable would work best.
So you're trying to determine the best set of predictor variables for your response variable that you're choosing at the end of your analysis.
Yes.
Okay. Interesting.
All right. Thank you so much for the presentation.
I have a comment. And also like
Okay,
a kind of like discussion with Jordan as well. So I was thinking, because you chose, we do experiments on taking openings. So what is interesting is that like size of openings and position of openings and doors does affect roof pressure. So we also see that. So it was very interesting for me to see that from the data, they kind of like came to the same point. This is very interesting. Does that like answer anything to you, or what you're talking about completely different, Jordan?
Wait, was that question towards me?
Yeah,
Yes.
I was no, because
Sorry,
I
I
was
zoned out at the last second.
Then take your discussion to your private
yeah
chat.
because this were you asking like where is the question I got like you're asking selection of opening affects roof, or how did they came to that?
No, I was unsure of the influence parameters they were using when I
Yeah,
was assuming that they were looking at predicting roof cover damage. It looked
yeah,
like we were using things like wind damage ratings, presence of large doors, things
yeah,
like that, that yes, they may actually influence it. I'm not saying
yeah,
that they don't. I'm just saying there weren't metrics of the material or other attributes, shape of the roof, things like that, that I didn't see that I would expect to
yeah.
see if we were predicting roof cover damage.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, kind of like, and we run experiments on openings, and we see similar like this, so that the shape of opening and doors, especially large roads, does have effect similarly on roof pressure. So that's
Yeah.
what I was trying to say. They're really good work, guys.
I had a question in the chat though, just to confirm my certain theories that is this the WISP test bed or is this a different test bed?
Mojongo, can you answer that? You can take your question to the mini conference. They will kind of present. I do have more questions as well on the predictivity of the model, but let's wait till the mini conference and move on to the next presentation. Thank you so much, Mojongo, Parisa, for the next
I think you should share the video.
group. So we have, so
Do you
Ali and
want,
Fuad were the second group to present, but they have internet connection problems. So they recorded videos, so we cannot take questions. They just had, they just gave us a video, which I'm gonna share now, and they gave a presentation to us. And
yeah,
I'm
but
gonna play
if
that
you all
video
have,
for you
sorry, but
guys.
if you all have any questions or feedback, just put it in a chat because we can share with them and just provide the answer for you too.
Yeah, I'm sure. So we can see Ali. Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Slides? Yeah, okay. So this is start. Ali now. He's talking.
We don't have the voice.
You don't have the audio?
No.
All right. Should I?
I think we should do something in the Zoom setting. I don't know how we should do that.
Can share the link and everybody watches.
If you want to share, can you put the link in chat? And if I can access it, maybe it will do the video volume. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Should I put it in the chat? Or...
Yes. Yeah, if you.
Okay, all right.
Hopefully I'll be able to access it. Okay, let's see if my settings are such where we can watch it. They may not be, but.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ali. I'm a PhD student at University of Waterloo. And my teammate Fuad, also from University of Waterloo. I'm going to present our progress on the project that Fuad and I were working on for the last few weeks. I do apologize for not being able to attend this meeting, but if you have any questions regarding my presentation, please feel free to reach out and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Here's the title for our project, Graph Attention Network for Spatial Correlation Analysis in UAV-based post-hurricane damage assessment. So essentially, after natural disasters like hurricanes or earthquakes, one of the biggest challenges we face is doing damage assessment. What we do in practice is we have several inspection teams that we send them to the field. They do damage assessment and then finally create reports. So while this method has been effective to some extent, it comes with some challenges like being slow, labor-intensive, and sometimes highly prone to human errors. More importantly, time is critical in post-disaster situations because delays in damage assessment can directly put lives at risk. So to address this issue, we need more faster and more reliable methods. Thanks to the advancement in technologies nowadays, we can use unmanned aerial vehicles, and we can send them to the field. They can fly over affected regions and capture high quality images of, let's say, buildings and all other infrastructure components. The next step, however, is to process and interpret these images more efficiently. So we need to develop more intelligent systems that can automatically analyze these images and determine the damage level of each building. With that being said, in this project, we introduced a method based on graph attention networks to perform automated post-hurricane damage assessment. So basically, we use power of graph-based deep learning and attention mechanism, and our model learns from relationship between buildings in aerial images and classify their damage states with high reliability. The dataset that we used for this project is DoriaNet dataset. So basically, this dataset provides UAV-based images with masks for each image. So basically, we can have multiple buildings in one image. So this dataset provides masks for each building, and using that mask, we can extract individual buildings for further processing. The dataset also provides GPS coordinates of buildings, number of stories for each buildings, and damage annotations based on hazards, and finally annotation efforts, which means how hard was for human annotators to identify the damage level of each building. Here the overview of our methodology. So basically, we have our raw image, which comes from unmanned aerial vehicle. We extract building patches from this original image. So this patch only represents a single building. We input this building patch to the image encoder to get deep features. In this case, image encoder can be ResNet, Vision Transformer, or Big Transfer, or whatever models that can be used for this purpose. In our scenario, we used Big Transfer model from Google. After getting these deep features from image encoder, we also have other metadata like number of stories for each building, and also annotation complexity. So we combine this information with deep features from image encoder to get more enhanced deep features. We do the same thing for all buildings, and we get deep features for all those buildings in our data set. After creating these deep features, now we can construct our graph. So in this case, we have a graph where each node represents a building. Basically, not building, deep features of that building. Then we have edges in our graph, and this graph is a weighted graph. So what is the weight for each edge? The weight here is spatial proximity. If two buildings are closer to each other, they will have more weights on the edge. After constructing the graph, we use graph attention networks to do damage assessment. So basically, we have nodes in our graph which represents our building, and finally, our goal is to classify each node in the graph, which is actually our buildings. To do so, we take a single node from graph, and we find attention map, which basically represents similarity of that specific building with all other buildings. So here we have two similarities. The first one is visual similarities, which we take the deep visual features from two buildings, and we find cosine similarity or whatever similarity metrics that we can use, plus spatial proximity. So we incorporate spatial proximity information in our attention weights. After getting this attention weights, we recalculate deep features, which in this case is like more contextualized deep features. So we had our original deep features, but this new features has information from other buildings as well. So we can call it more contextualized deep features. After doing this, we do a linear projection and finally aggregation layers. So why we have aggregation layers? Because we use multi-head attention, which basically means we replicate this attention mechanism multiple times with different projection matrices, and finally we aggregate them in a single layer. And after that, we have decoder, where we do final damage prediction. We don't have our results ready yet. We're still working. We're still training our model, tuning our hyperparameters. So that's why we don't have our results ready yet. But if you have any questions, like this is all I have for now, but if you have any questions, feel free to reach out and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ruben. So everyone, if you have questions, please ask. Cannot answer it for sure. But be nice, because they are not here. You cannot ask any questions. Hard questions.
I just really appreciate that they reached out to y'all ahead of time and made this video for where they were in the process, which was the whole point of this, was just kind of sharing where they are in the process of the data challenge. And I just want to thank Pooria and Purisa for all of your work. Harmon and Richard also, y'all had a lot of stuff going on and a lot of moving pieces this week. Y'all did a fabulous job. I'm really excited to see what everyone's been working on behind the scenes. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I do have one question about this presentation. So how does it work basically? They use a really large model like ResNet, and they use transfer learning and get to the point that they predict the damages based on the images that exist there.
I can answer this question.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I can answer. The point is that when it comes to the graph neural networks, each node is associated with some of the features. And usually in the civil engineering cases, we don't have such features. So one of the things that they people do, especially the ones that are using the images, they use the large models and they train it on images that they have it, and they extract some of those information from those features. You can view it as a feature extraction or feature generation module. And after that, those features are linked to each of the nodes that we have it, and the main learning process starts there. So they call it transfer learning. I more consider it as a feature generation because we don't have such features in our context.
More of an encoding because
yes,
decoding is done by Google or okay.
When you do encode and decode, they're actually using the images, which is high dimensional, and they are reducing to the lower dimension. So they are encoding and decoding, but I know that we have some cases that we are going to the higher dimension. So there is generating the features.
That was a really basic question. All right. With that, we're gonna close the meeting, right, Robin? Thanks everyone for being here and for all your questions.
Thank you so much.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
See you in the mini conference.
Have a great Easter weekend.
Have a good weekend.